Welcome to Inside Politics, our weekly podcast on 3 or 4 things you need to know about San Antonio politics. I'm Greg Jefferson, politics editor of the San Antonio Express-News. I'm joined today by City Hall reporter Molly Smith.
Hello.
Hello. And our special guest, District 4 Councilman Edward Mungia, who, in his spare time, moonlights as Spurs Jesus. Spurs Jesus, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Have a couple of questions for you right off the bat. What's it like to publicly scrap with the mayor at a news conference? And 2, are you on the Spurs payroll?
So answer the first question, I have no idea. I've never sparred with her. And number 2, not on the payroll.
Okay. Are you saying you're not actually Spurs Jesus?
Correct. Not Spurs Jesus.
Actually, this is a joke because you disabused us of that at last week's council meeting. You said, everybody thinks I'm Spurs Jesus. I'm not. So, I didn't actually buy it, obviously. So, anyway.
Yeah, no. And luckily, when I said that at the time, he actually wasn't in the room because he was kind of going in and out of the room.
Was he in and out?
Yeah. And I was like, I hope he's out of the room when I say this because it'll be more impactful. And it was true. Some people didn't like the joke, but 6 hours of a long meeting, the small moment of levity.
Who didn't like the joke? It was a fine joke. At that point, you needed something because it had been such an intense meeting. So this was the meeting in which City Council rejected Mayor Gina Ortiz Jones's resolution to basically delay a vote on the term sheets for the Spurs Arena. She wanted more time for City Council members to have town hall meetings in their districts, and she wanted a new, truly independent economic an analysis of the arena project. And also so that went down to defeat. You voted against it, as did 6 of your other colleagues. And then you did adopt the term sheet 7-4. So let's start with that vote.
Sure.
Yeah. Tell us what made you say, let's not get some fresh data. Let's not do these town halls. Let's go ahead and say, let's execute the terms, finalize this deal.
Sure. And I'll say that with the term sheet, the very important non-binding piece of that, right? And so I was kind of looking at the next steps after Thursday. November is a crucial date because the county's proposition for their portion of the deal will be up to the voters. So my idea was it has to be in some way tied before November because November's uncertain. And you could look at it one of 2 ways, right? If we did not have this term sheet and the voters passed the county's proposition, what we have been kind of talking about at length about what we want out of a deal and what they should put in would change because of that reality. Because then the Spurs would come and say, hey, we won this vote by, so much percentage. Now they could have said we can rethink pieces of this deal. And if you read the non-binding term sheet, it puts the city in a really good low risk position based on how we get the payment, the loan repaid, and who's responsible for what. Now, if the voters had turned down the county's proposition in November and we didn't have this tied to it, there's a world where we could still have done a deal. And we potentially could put more PFZ money into the deal because our project finance zone capacity, which is the state's portion of the sales tax or hot tax that they collect, is much larger than what we are putting into the Spurs Stadium because we want to do the Alamo Dome, the Convention Center, which are still many months, if not years away from being made, decisions being made on that. So there's more capacity to put into the deal. And locking us into a certain commitment ahead of November was best for the city organization and by extension, San Antonians.
So I'm a little slow this morning. Again, walk me through how it might have been to the city's disadvantage to not have this agreement ahead of the vote. I'm just not clear on that.
Yeah. So if the proposition had passed and we had not had the term sheet, basically the other negotiating party would have had sort of a mandate at that point. And we would be on the heels as a city, right? So in the non-binding term sheet, they're responsible for maintenance. That could have been a conversation at that point. Yeah, they're going to do CBA. That could have been a different conversation if they had won this vote moving forward.
So by the vote, you're talking about the November vote? Okay,
yes,
so county voters voting on the venue tax election that Bexar County put on the menu. So that'll provide financing of up to $311 million.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
So that would essentially, in your mind, if voters approved it and there wasn't this term sheet in place, it would give the Spurs leverage over the city to negotiate things that were more favorable to
It
them.
would give them more leverage than they had before November, because again, it's very uncertain what's going to happen. And so we want to put them in a specific position for us. And they understand that, right? They're a negotiating party as well. And again, if it fails, now with the term sheet, our deal collapses. So if voters go and turn down this county proposition, our deal goes away. And we can either choose to restart that process from the ground up or say it failed, so there's nothing at this point.
Yeah. Now, is there an argument to be made that maybe the county was premature in calling a venue tax election? I mean, the city was negotiating the term sheet through last weekend. You know, we were hearing Friday before the vote that they'd wrapped it up. They were kind of going through it, make sure, you know, all the I's were dotted and T's crossed. And then Monday they released it just, you know, 3 days before a vote. Is it possible that county should have put off a venue tax election? You know, until you had a firmer deal?
Yeah, I think for them, and again, they were under pressure to get that on the ballot in May, right? So this is even a delay from the original timeline that they were working with. But I think for them, they knew what capacity they had to put into a deal. And they said, this is what we're able to put in. The voters will decide. The rest is up to the city, right? They were just kind of like, we're good on our side. This is what we're doing. You know, they had, I think, all but one commissioner voted in favor of that proposition to be put on the ballot. So for them, it was just like, keep moving forward, keep going. This is what we can. This is the most we can do. So we're just going to put it out there and see what happens.
What do you think is going to happen in November? And I asked because there were a lot of folks who signed up to give public comment where they're making their case before you all ahead of the vote for, you know, whether they support or oppose the deal. And a lot of the folks were in opposition. They said, don't do this. It's not a good deal. Is that an indicator of broader public sentiment, or kind of, if we were to call this election, you know, if the election was tomorrow, how do you see the vote shaking out?
You know, I think there's a lot of factors. I just honestly don't know how it's going to turn out. You know, Cops Metro is leading a great organization against this initiative. Obviously, the Spurs are going to have their own campaign for this initiative. And again, I think the difference is, I think a lot of people who have signed up for public comment are very attached to the municipal voting process. And November will be a much larger pool, right? And I think you don't really know what that's going to entail, because the press and the media has had a certain storyline going out there. So that might motivate people who are not connected at all to City Hall or don't know, haven't watched a single meeting, just to say yes or no based on the headline. So we really don't know what's going to happen. And again, that's part of the reason why I thought it was important to do something before November, because it's just uncertain.
So you were elected in May. I mean, you'd been a city council staffer for years and years, but you won office in May. This was your first big vote, a very high profile vote. And as you mentioned, you had about 6 hours of public comment, a lot of it against both Project Marvel and specifically against the Spurs arena. And kind of setting aside whether you think there's anything to those arguments or not, that's a lot of opinion that you went against. What's it like in your first public vote to side against a lot of people who have been in your face for hours now, asking for exactly the opposite of what you're doing? What's that like?
Not easy. Bottom line, not easy.
Councilman understatement. Welcome.
You're right. Yes. So, you know, I had talked to a lot of residents ahead of time before that. We had our Able City meeting didn't have a lot of folks. They were mostly like, okay, figure out the parking, right? Parking was the largest issue for folks at that meeting. I had a separate president's meeting where neighbor association presidents and committee appointees came, about 40 folks. Minimal question. They understood. Once we took the time to explain everything, it was understood. And again, I'm for an independent study. I was one of the two that advocated for that who ended up voting for the term sheet. So that constitutes a majority now that have asked for that. And Wednesday after public comment, I went back to City Hall and I called back and emailed a lot of residents that reached out. I stayed there till 10:30, reaching out to folks. Every conversation I had, and I explained the actual term sheet, which was already public and on my work accounts, social media accounts, everybody learned something new. And it softened their anxiety and anger over this slightly. Now, again, if you're not for this at all, you're not going to be for this at all. If you're seeking some sort of better arrangement or input or data, those people understood there was more to it than they knew. And so once I sat down and explained it to residents.
Can you give me an example of something that in common sense your constituents didn't know that once they learned about it, it's like, oh, yeah, okay. That's
sure,
cool.
yeah.
That's good.
Two major things. That the Spurs are on the hook for maintenance of the facility for 30 years. People are like, oh, that's
they
good.
thought it was on the city.
Right, they thought it was on the city. Another one, they're not going to be able to play a home game outside of San Antonio for 30 years.
Really?
People didn't know that.
You all aren't going to negotiate Austin.
I mean, that was supposed to be the case with the county's agreement with the Spurs until it got amended.
Right, and again, something could be. And I explained this on Thursday. There's still room to make things, change things in this agreement, right? But starting off, that is what we're looking at, right? That's not going to happen. CBA, right? Folks didn't understand that was contributing. They didn't know that we would be charging the Spurs 4 times the lease that they were paying with the county. At a 2% increase every year on top of that. They didn't know the structure of the bond that we're going to do for the arena, and that it's being paid back in very specific and certain ways. Those things were not known to people, even though those are specified in the non-binding term sheet. So
right.
I know Mayor Jones, after the vote played out, she was on the losing end. She then said, okay, I now want to try to put the city's $489 million contribution up to a public vote. And this would be something we haven't seen before. She's saying it's legally permissible, but it's not allowed, it's not required by the state, because you would be repaying this debt that the city would issue through revenue bonds, and you could conceivably have voters weigh in of whether the city should issue them or not. Where do you stand on that? On her call for, let's let voters weigh in, just like they're doing for the county, and say, should the city be allowed to authorize this debt?
Sure. Well, Thursday when you heard that, it was also the first time I heard that also. So, I have not even heard from the city attorney. So in principle, I agree. Sure. Put that up. Now this morning and even last night, I was talking to some of the folks that are really involved in the progressive space in San Antonio. And, their argument to me was, well, this vote in November, the Spurs are going to put a lot of money into this, and the opposition doesn't have that much. So, if you're going to put another vote out there, you can expect the similar sentiment. So, in principle, I agree with that. I think by May, we're also going to try to be putting up a housing bond. We might try to put up our own infrastructure bond. There may or may not be a Project Marvel infrastructure bond also on that ballot. And then keep in mind, from what I heard from the clerk, was that the county does not have to actually facilitate that election in May, because it's an even year May election, which would put the city to front the cost of all that election also. So there's a lot of things to still work out. And, in principle, again, not against it, but where are the details going to be shown?
Yeah.
So
now, you were a staffer for Councilwoman Adriana Rocha Garcia when this really got started, and most of it has played out in behind the scenes. I mean, the city the city manager only began talking about Project Marvel in the Spurs arena less than a year ago. It was in November 2024. As you were kind of in, and I know that council didn't have just a flood of information about this project as it was in development, as the city was talking with the Spurs, and to a limited extent, the council. So you didn't have much information. What was your impression of this as an individual, as it was coming along in development? I mean, were you bothered by the lack of transparency, the fact that this was taking place kind of in secret?
Yeah, no, I think for something of this magnitude, and I've referenced this a few times on the dais, my now colleague Councilwoman Terry Castillo had a council consideration request about implementing a CBA process before this even was discussed.
And this is a community benefits agreement.
A community benefits agreement, yes. And so the fact that we didn't have things in place ahead of that is not great, right? And there wasn't a lot of attention paid for the public on the entirety of Project Marvel. So when I was elected, I had a briefing with Eric Walsh, the city manager, And we went through Project Marvel, and I was like, Eric, this is not on KSAT, right? Like everything you're telling me is on paper.
You mean Express News, right?
I won't get into who covers it better, but a lot of details that, were not necessarily controversial, just were not out there for public consumption. And again, there are people who still think that Thursday was the green light for all of Project Marvel. And I keep telling folks, there are so many more decisions to be made, so many years of planning for everything still. So, by no means is this done and final. But of course, I think the city, it's like shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? They should have started this process earlier. They would have done this. They could have done this. But as we move forward, all the other pieces, that should inform us on how to proceed.
And my question was a little loaded. Do you hate transparency or not so?
Love transparency.
we all love it. Okay, so you've got a new mayor who has really had no experience in City Hall before she was elected. And this is her first big, very high profile vote. And she went all out last week. And that means disrupting District 10 Councilman Mark White's budget town hall meeting on Monday or Tuesday night before the vote, and then disrupting a pro-Project Marvel news conference on Wednesday. She's taken, her tactics have been pretty hard-edged. How is this going to, in your opinion, affect her relationship, or how the city council relates with her going forward on this and other major issues? Like, are you going to be able to trust her going forward?
I trust her no matter what she does, right? With regards to the press conference or the way she chooses to, execute her vision or to plan that out. So we have a really good working relationship. The vast majority of council has a great working relationship. I was talking to every council member about the the call for an independent study, regardless of Thursday, right? Some agreed, some disagreed. Talked to them about that also. So I think it's up to each individual council member how they choose to go about that, because every council member has their own style. As your last guest said, I'm more of a reflective council member. I lead with a spirit of collaboration. So it's going to be up to each individual. And again, the majority of council probably agrees on 90% of what we're going to do moving forward. We had a great budget meeting on Wednesday about homelessness, housing, animal care services. And our budget meetings, we are pretty much on the same page with a lot of things moving forward. So, this is a hard topic. People want different things out of this. But, the mayor's style is uniquely her own. And I give her space and credit to do what she wants to do. She was elected. And so I give her all the space I can to lead, let her lead in the way she wants to.
How many times have you met with her since your election?
Well, several.
Or since her election?
Yeah, several. We've met in person several times. We've talked on the phone. We had a town hall together, which was extremely successful, in my opinion. Again, a mayor and a council member answering questions for 45 minutes directly from people. You haven't seen that, right? So we get along real well, and we disagreed on this. But I imagine, this week we'll agree on something else.
Yeah.
So
you have faith that everybody's going to be able to get over kind of this vote. It was kind of polarized last week, but you can come back together.
Well, I'm an optimist, so some would say that's a weak spot for me, or a flaw of mine, that I'm an optimist.
Well, and you worked at City Hall for how long?
Yeah, I've been there 10 years. In October will be 10 years at City Hall, and I still believe we can come together, we can hold hands.
Well, because, often that actually does happen.
Yes, it happens all the time.
It's not crazy.
No, and that's what everybody looks at, right? Today we're on this. Terry Castillo and Mark White just had a ride along in each other's districts. They disagreed vehemently on homelessness the very next day. Actually. So we all get along. We're all there to help each other out. And ultimately, we will all be on different sides of votes at some point together. But it's just moving forward and continuing collaboration and trying to work together.
What do you see being the next kind of big vote or big divisive vote that's going to come before this mayor and council?
That's a good question. You ask all the good questions, Molly, all the tough questions. I think we'll get through the budget pretty well. But I think as we move forward in our committee work, the housing bond, I see that as coming up. There's going to be, I'm sure, a majority support with what we're going to end up doing. difference of opinions on that. Homelessness is going to be a huge topic at the Planning Community Development Committee. Obviously, we're shaking things up at the city level with how it's going over to a different department, essentially, that homelessness division. So how we do that, how we work on encampment sweeps, possibly reductions of those, possibly some people want those increased, some people want them eliminated. So I think those are going to be some hot topics for us moving forward. And, not to get ahead of it, but pretty soon we will start negotiations on a San Antonio Police Officers Association contract. I imagine that will be covered extensively by you all, and there probably will be some different opinions on that piece also.
Have you begun as council started talking with Andy Segovia about those negotiations? As you know, the fire union contract talks occurred earlier this year, and we had somewhat of a breakdown when a group of council members said they felt like they were just getting no information in kind of the council's closed door executive session and nothing about contract negotiations from the city attorney. They kind of backed off and they seem to have resolved their differences. They were getting a little more information. Is the situation going to be any better for the police contract? Are they going to get a regular feed of information on how the contract talks are going or no?
I certainly hope so. And I will say, some of those folks are not at council. It's a different council. It's a different makeup, right? So I think we will start those conversations in the new year. I don't think that will happen before the new year, and just kind of go through it all. So I expect lessons learned on that from everybody, city staff and council members who are returning and watch this happen. And again, most of us were around that, right? Even all the new council members were either at the county or at the city before we were elected. So we are kind of aware of what's happening ahead of time, but I think it'll be a good conversation.
Let's talk about the city council committees. There are 9 of these. The mayor, a week and a half ago now, named her chairs. You are one of them. You're on planning and community development. And one thing that kind of surprised some folks was that you have these kind of first-term council members who were named chair, and then some of the more senior members, Terry Castillo, Mark White, Marina Alderete-Gavito, were left out. What do you see kind of behind the mayor's decisions of how she picked the committees, how she named the chairs, and also the fact that a handful of these, I think including yours, have 4 members, which could result in a gridlock if there's a tie vote versus kind of the standard 5 members, which we would see to kind of prevent a tie if all members are present?
Yeah, so I'll speak to what I advocated for myself on Planning Community Development Committee. That committee was formed, and the first chair of that committee was my predecessor, Councilman Rocha Garcia, and I was her lead staffer from the very beginning. So I have staffed that committee for 6 years, I think, so more or so. And I helped her with the agenda. So I am extremely familiar with that committee and how it works. The Unified Development Code, housing, homelessness, or some of the major topics that committee discusses. So when I met with her, I said, I know it's not typical for freshmen to be chairs, but obviously I have a very different experience level and I've been around city council for longer than any council member has been there. And I've seen all of their predecessors and even sometimes 2 or 3 of their predecessors, depending on the district. So very aware. So I think my experience helped me on that committee. And 4 is not typical, but I'm not sure quite the reasoning for that. But at least for my committee, I build consensus. I check in with council members on what they want at committees. So a lot of prep work goes into developing those agendas ahead of a vote. Not to say there won't be surprises or, if someone's absent, that does change things for us. It makes it a little difficult, but, we're there just to continue on.
So you approached the mayor about the chairmanship?
Everybody had a meeting, as far as I understand, early on, and that was an opportunity to talk about priorities and committees for everybody. So at that meeting, I took the opportunity to say, I would like to be chair of this committee. I don't know that this will happen or that you'll do this. But again, my experience is very high in dealing and working on that committee.
Now, you'd mentioned homeless services, which is now a standalone department. Kind of explain for us what you envision that department actually doing.
Yeah. So right now, it was under the Department of Human Services, which also does youth services, senior services, and nonprofit contracts. And homelessness, of course, as everybody knows in the city of San Antonio, is a growing issue, and it was kind of crowding out some of the work they were doing. So the city manager decided to put this division under Mark Carmona, who is our chief housing officer, and he reports directly to the city manager. So I think it's going to be more of a holistic approach to it. So he has a certain vantage point that's different from DHS and the Neighborhood and Housing Services Department. Yeah. So I think his job is really going to be working with partners, right? Because we can only put so much money into this every year. Federal dollars are probably going to go away. And so he's got to be real strategic on our investments. And then as we move into the next housing bond, trying to outline exactly what we can do to make that happen. But it's going to have to get creative with things for sure. Yeah.
So will they do encampment sweeps or no?
As far as I know, they're still moving on encampment sweeps, but I think there's some momentum to take a deeper dive into that because last fiscal year, the city council increased it to a record number of sweeps. We're seeing the homeless population be hovering around the same amount. And even as folks are transitioning out of that, there are new folks coming into the homeless population. So obviously it's not solving that issue. It is helping house residents feel better about their neighborhoods, or there are some quality of life issues, right? Of course, no one should be living in and using restrooms and vacant lots, right, next to neighborhoods. But we're going to have to look at a better view of what that gets us and what kind of services we're offering in advance of that.
Are there a lot of homeless encampments in District 4 on the southwest side? There
are. And District 4 is home to a lot of large vacant land, which not a lot of districts have. So we do have hotspots. Marbach and 410 is a huge hotspot for our district. 35 military 90s, Arsamora 35, a lot of drainage channels in people's neighborhoods. So we do have a huge situation.
What do you hear from residents in that area? Kind of what's the weight of it? Clear them out or find some other means of dealing with it?
Yeah, they just want it done. But
does that mean like cleared out or
like folks housed?
Right. Yeah. It's a little bit of everything. Now, I would say most of the folks that I talk to, and I've been there for a very long time, they want them cleared out. They just don't want to see it, and they don't want to experience that. And I've spent a lot of time talking to folks about what that means and how we can help them and what we're doing. And I'm like, that's fine, but that's your job to figure out, right? Like, it's not for me to come up with a solution. It's for you to come up with a solution and solve the problem, which is going to have a larger conversation about shelter space because most of our homeless shelters and resources are in the center city. And District 4 is the edge of the city. Our whole border is with the county, so we have to look at mobilization of resources in a much better way and partner with, faith-based groups that actually want to help.
Can you repeat that?
Can you repeat that? No,
yes. Happy to do that. I've been repeating it for many years now. So we got to get creative with our faith-based organizations that want to help, and I would say have flexibility to help because of zoning rules. They're exempt from zoning laws. So you can have a church in any place, and if you add something to it, you may not have to have the zoning fight that new shelters always have to have. So
how much partnership happens right now between the city and county when it comes to homelessness, especially in areas of the city like yours, which are really bordering the county boundary or county territory?
As far as contact with encampments, not much. If it's something the city really doesn't go out there. Now, obviously the county spends money on, resources, the Center for Healthcare Services and other things like that. So I think that's another piece that even some council members brought up on last Wednesday's budget meeting is how do we coordinate with the county so we're not duplicating efforts, right? If we're spending money on nonprofit and the county is also, and it's for the same program, how do we shift that funding around to make it more holistic? And I think especially with the Spurs Stadium, there is so much more momentum to work with the county than there was before. And I think they're willing partners to also solve the issue.
How do you think that the mayor's criticisms of the county's portion of this arena deal, specifically her criticism that there's no community benefits agreement, how is that if anything, going to strain the relationship with the county, which I think under former Mayor Ron Nirenberg and County Judge Peter Sakai, they weren't as close as maybe some folks thought, that they often, I think, were operating on kind of different tracks. The mayor Jones has said, I want to have a better relationship, but has really attacked the county publicly the last week. I guess, how is that going to kind of help hurt the status of the city-county relationship?
Yeah. You might have to ask them how that works. I would say that we all have been in this world a long time, right? Nobody that's serving right now was really not involved at all in city government or politics and then jumped in. So I think we all know that there are times when people take sides of an opinion or say something about somebody else, and that's sometimes part of the business that we're in. And then sometimes you go and you take a picture with them, right? So, Ted Cruz has taken several pictures with several council members who have said things against them. Same thing with Greg Abbott, right? I think they know sometimes this is the way things are played out. Sometimes it's what you want to say or need to say publicly. And then there's always space to work together. Again, an optimist. So I think we'll be okay.
So you've kind of, and here we are back at the election. I thought we'd moved on. So you are, your vote went, squarely against COPS Metro, which is, probably the city's largest kind of grassroots community activist group. And it could not have been an easy move for you. Are you concerned that just given kind of the tone of the council debate last week and the dueling news conferences, that it became just a very polarized issue and that could continue? And if that's the case, you could have, are you afraid of your vote, your support for a term sheet for an arena becoming a litmus test of some kind? Is it possible that Cops Metro will remember that and look at it?
Sure, yeah. They have a long memory, so no doubt.
They do,
no doubt they'll remember that.
They do.
And I met with them, and I sat at a table with 20 of them, and I took the heat. But again, I was on the South Sound School Board, so I can do anything after that. And so no doubt, but Cops Metro is one of those great organizations that are wanting to work with people, right? They understand where things are, how things get done. And so I've taken a lot of heat from progressive friends, right? That helped me get elected and say they're very disappointed in me. And I completely understand their perspective. But I've been talking to folks before Thursday and since Thursday, even this morning, right before I came here, had tough conversations. The important thing to note is that nothing is done. With that vote on Thursday, nothing.
But if you're adamantly opposed to this, that's a very unsatisfying.
Well, if you're
nothing is done because but it could be done, and you set that in motion with
the vote. But again, you have to separate the two, right? There are some folks that do not want this regardless, right? And the independent study says this is great for the economy. They're not going to want it, right? If the Spurs did much more, they don't want it. So you have to separate that from folks that are asking for more reasonable parts of this plan, which is the independent study, which again, we have support for. There's still momentum for that to inform future decisions because we're still years out from other decisions we have to make. So there are people that want to work on this moving forward. And I'm doing my best to educate my voters in D4 about what's going on with this. And also people that I have counted on as friends that may disagree, that there's still so much more work to be done and more collaboration to do.
So your progressive friends, like, what are their objections to an arena?
Their objections stem mostly on the independent study not having been done before a term sheet. And I think there's more debate about what an independent study would inform us on a term sheet, because at the end of the day, the loan is the loan and we get paid back. We get paid back, right? And again, and I mentioned this, the Spurs build the arena and they don't sell a single ticket. That's their problem, not the city's. They have to pay us back no matter how well they do, how well the economy does. And so that's a large objection. They want more informational settings, more meetings, which again, I think is fine, but everyone has to pressure their own council member and not set a blanket statement that every council member must do something. That's on us to do, which I will be doing, and I'm sure others will as well.
Is some of that criticism about the lack of the independent study based in a belief or a sense of that the Spurs, had there been better data or more independent data, that the Spurs would end up be paying for more of the arena. Right now, it's about 62% public, the remainder private. Is that part of this kind of progressive argument, is that much more of this should have been privately financed?
There's a large argument that people want to see more private financing. Again, I don't know what an independent study would show as far as who needs to put in more when we do get back everything that we put in at some point. And I think that's the hard part, is trying to explain to folks, what are you looking for when you see that report? And then having a conversation of if the city can afford it. It's not the city government. If we can afford it, it's the city of San Antonio can support that as ticket purchasers and people going to the games, which also, again, doesn't necessarily become the city of San Antonio government's problem if we're making them pay us back everything that we give them. So I think it's kind of, what are we going to get from that? And again, the San Antonio market is what's driving this conversation, because people say, oh, LA, the Clippers, they did a whole 100% their own financing. Well, they also have 2 basketball teams that they can support with the market that they have, right?
And a billionaire owner. Who was willing to write the check.
Yes, right. And so what you're going to see here is the return on investment for the ownership of the team would take a lot longer to see than markets like Los Angeles, which is a very different situation. So, and I think there's a larger conversation on our return on investments in general. I was talking to somebody Saturday and they said, when we do public art, we don't look at return on investment on that, right? That's something we put out there. We're not going to see a dollar per dollar return. And the Spurs arena, we will see that money returned back to us, what we spent. But there's also something to be said about an institution in the city that's been here for over 30 years. And I joked with them and said, kids don't have a picture of me or Eric Walsh or, the mayor in their backpack. They have this, right? They have the San Antonio Spurs. And I said, there's a lot of fanfare up here. We're all fans. It doesn't cloud our judgment on a financial deal, which I still think is in the city's best interest over them.
How much does your support, if any, have to do with the fear that if the Spurs don't get a downtown arena, they'll look elsewhere? They'll, whether it's Seattle, Las Vegas, Austin, which seems increasingly less likely.
Yes.
But I mean, Seattle and Las Vegas, they're both very interested in getting an NBA team.
Sure. I haven't made a single decision based on a fear of that sort. And I'll be honest with you, I've met with them a few different times. They've never expressed that to me, right? That you have that conversation has not come up. So I think that's a very public conversation that people are throwing out there. I do think if we're going to continue with this independent study, it should include some assumptions made if they leave. Just to let folks know what is at stake, right? And ultimately, it'll be a voter decision based on November and based on a future bond for Project Marvel in general. But it should include that, and I'm not basing fears off that. Now, do I have my own personal, what's going to happen? What would that do to the psychology of people to say, you know what, we're poor, we can't afford this, and they have to go somewhere else? I don't know what that's going to look like, but we should have a study that informs us of that. And I've been telling folks, look, when AT&T left the city of San Antonio many years ago, we haven't had a Fortune 500 company relocate their headquarters here. Right. So the Spurs leave. I'm not saying that we need to lure another team at some point. That's not the conversation. It is who's going to continue to make investments in our city for jobs, which again is what everybody needs to have, good paying jobs when that institution leaves, because we didn't want to put state hot tax and state revenues and a loan to solve that problem. So we spent a ton of time talking about Project Marvel, the Spurs arena, and I'm kind of curious about what happened to all the discussion about the big budget deficit. What's happened to it? I know that CPS came in and saved the day. Is everybody sighing a breath of relief, or is the gap still there and still something to worry about? Yeah, the gap has been closed when the city manager presented the budget, last week or 2 weeks ago. I can't recall now. Since then, council members have made requests, right? Put more money, and including myself, right? Put more money here, put more money there.
Yeah.
Nobody has ever said to the city manager, take money from here, except maybe my colleague in D10 maybe said something about art or something. So, it was a balanced budget. And so as we move forward, there will be some more balancing happening. But, CPS did come in. Their revenue, of course, is not as high as it has been the past few years. Oddly enough, this past summer has been cooler than the past several years, which means energy consumption has not been as high, which means they haven't produced as much revenue for us. So I think we'll be okay this fiscal year. The next two, if the economy continues to slide, will be more challenging with sales tax, property tax, and depending on the weather, CPS revenue.
I know one maybe potential area of conflict on this council when it comes to the budget is whether or not the city manager will add these 40 patrol officers that had been planned to be part of this year before they saw kind of the financial outlook. Where do you stand on that, on whether or not we should add more patrol officers or keep it at the 25 that were built in?
So part of that addition of officers is for the new Southeast substation in District 3. So, staffing that, obviously that makes sense and that's okay. What I have brought up at the last council meeting when we discussed this was the 60-40 plan was a plan initiated by the last council. And I don't know that there was necessarily some concrete information laid out as to the effect of that. So they're telling me that these officers are doing, extra work on top of their calls, and there's more time to be proactive. I have yet to see what that proactive work has yielded us. If it's yielding us a lot of traffic, parking on the wrong way or speeding tickets, or, you ran the red light or something, that's one thing. If they're solving domestic abuse issues, that's another thing, right? So, and I had this conversation with the deputy city manager. They said, well, there's a lot of drugs that are being seized, right? Some of this is drugs off the streets or whatever, but that has been as a result of a traffic stop. So that is somebody that is driving recklessly and they get pulled over and then something happens, right? Which, of course, the end result is what most of the public wants. But I need a little bit more on patrol especially. There's other divisions of the police department. Council works a lot with the safe officers, which are more of your neighborhood police. They, to me, do a lot of the real proactive work as far as they know exactly who lives in the neighborhoods, what problem house it is, and watching certain houses to see if they'll slip up to then kind of do something on top of. You also have SA Core, which is taking mental health calls. So those calls that Safe and Core do reduce the calls that go to patrol, which in some, if you kind of plot that out, that means that they're helping them become more proactive. So I just said, look, I'm open to this conversation, but I just need to see the data and I need to see what, how we're able to help with these other units that I know do much more specific work that then kind of frees up the patrol work. Because again, patrol is going from call to call. So they may not necessarily know in this neighborhood, right on this street, that house is causing troubles for neighbors. That house we think is a drug house, right? That level of information doesn't exist for patrol as far as I know. So I just said, let's just take a look at that. I mean, we have new committees, we have new council members. We're in a deficit. Adding this is a one-time cost right now, but obviously in perpetuity, that cost, it does go up with staffing. So, we need to take a look at that.
All right. Edward Mungia, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you. If you have not signed up for the ENside Politics newsletter, I mean, at this point, I just don't know what to say other than go down to the show notes, click on the thing and sign up. We will see you next week. And thank you very much.